So this is update 1.2 of the atmospheric scattering shader. And there's been a lot of changes in this update. It's basically a completely whole different system. Everything's improved. There's new settings. There's new like rendering techniques. And so I guess I'll just show you the main one. This one's the one that I've been working on probably the most. And probably the most interesting to everybody. So I'm going to just start it up and show you. So you can see here there's shadows, like full, atmospheric shadows, and also screen space effects for the actual, like silhouettes of the shadow. And this, doing shadows on a planetary scale is incredibly hard, at least in, traditional rendering techniques. But the way I'm doing these shadows, they're basically free with the atmospheric effect. Well, at least if you use the volumetric shadows. Like, so if you already have these volumetric, shadows, then just adding these screen space shadows is basically free. And so you can see here, they do, they're not perfect, but they are definitely far better than the traditional shadows you'll get in Unity, at least for this higher distance. Their render distance is about, I think it's about 60, so it's about 10,000. Well, actually, let me check here. That's 100,000. They have a render distance of 100,000 meters, and it all still looks pretty natural. So I'm going to go out, fly out of the atmosphere backwards, and I'll show you what that looks like. I have to just get up pretty far. So you can see here, you can see that this is what the shadows look like from space. I mean, you can get further away and they'll still have details in certain areas, but if I get really far away, you'll be able to see the shadows still there, but they lower resolution, so they're not as grainy and noisy. So, yeah. And it's a screen space effect, so all the so as you get further away, things get less detailed and stuff, which is really nice effect. It's like a slow fade out of the shadows. And I actually have a standard, when you're close up, you have just shadows generated by, shadow maps the traditional way, and then I screen space sample them using the volumetric ray casting, ray tracing. But I also have, just when there are no shadows rendered at all, like when you completely disable these shadows, you'll still have a spherical shadow, just one that's the approximation of the planet. And so even if you have all these shadows completely disabled, and by the way, you can disable shadows just by setting this to negative. I'm not going to do that right now, but you can. Let me try it. Yeah, okay. So this is what I'm talking about. There's basically a sphere in there that's generating these shadows, and this is the situation where I don't have any shadows set up. These are all disabled by setting this to a negative number, and there's still shadows. And the reason for that is because if you disable these shadows, or if I go over here and I just set the shadow opacity to 0, this basically just means the shadows aren't rendered, or they're not added to the screen. And if I change this ambient color down like you would normally have it, this is the standard Lambert shading. And the problem with it is that you have on the back of the planets, you can still see the highlights of the silhouettes of objects as the sun hits them, but it goes through them. And so with this new model, you can increase the environment setting. I mean, you can increase that so that it's not as much of a contribution. And then you go over here to the shadows. You increase the shadow strength to about like I usually find 0.98 is best, because you still want to be able to see a little bit in the shadows. And then if you enable this again, you can see it's now using textures to sample the shadows, well, using the shadow map to sample the shadows. And the cool thing is that the shadows are, by the density of the light around them. So the shadows back here are extremely dark, but the shadows over here, you can hardly see them. They're sort of faded. I mean, you can still see them, but they're very faded, and they're like a very subtle effect. And so it's pretty nice. I'm getting closer. And so, yeah, there are a few other features that I did that I'll show you in just a sec. But this is the main one, just planetary shadows. And they're pretty cheap. They're as cheap as I can get them. Well, as cheap as I can get them for now. And I'm still working on improving them. But you can see they're pretty detailed too. Like if I go over here to this, you can see the shadow. There's no collision because that's not part of this, and it kind of would be a waste of time. Anyway, let me try to show you the shadows of this object. Someone, light, is waiting for the sun to come up. So you can see here when this happens that you can actually, there's pretty detailed shadows like close up, because the ship is fairly large, but it's not that large, so you can see there's still detailed shadows up at this level. But then when you go further away, there's still shadows detailed and stuff. But you can also see here that the shadows get darker as the sun moves over or is further away. And so, yeah. Now, a few other things that I improved was I just basically improved completely the volumetric rendering method. So now I'm actually rendering this whole planet at 25 samples when before I'd render it about 50. And the way I did that was with using dithering, and I also did downsampling and bilateral upsampling and bilateral blurring. So you can see if I just, okay, so right now I'm rendering the atmosphere at 1/4 of the resolution of the screen. This, I can render it at, let me just wait for the atmosphere to come up so you can see the difference. If I grab this. So let me make the shadows, the atmosphere stop. Okay, right there. It's a good place to stop. Now, you can see if I lower the resolution or increase the resolution, it increases the resolution of the shadow map. So they are actually a screen space effect. You can see that because I downsample less. So this right now with a downsampling 0, this is rendering at the screen resolution. And if I downsample 1, that's half the screen resolution. And now this is 1/4. You can actually go to 1/8 of the screen resolution. I think that one's a little bit too much, but if you wanted really low quality, if you wanted to lower the quality enough so that anyone could run it, you do this. Because I can actually run this at 8K with the shadows at about 1/4 resolution, and it's fine. I have the 8K right here. Okay, now it's rendering at 8K. Okay, well let me try the 8th of the rest. Okay, it's still pretty laggy. It's 20.4 FPS. But yeah, it's 8K. It's 4K right here. 4K can render this just fine at at an 1/8 resolution, and 1/8 resolution is fine for 4K because that's basically here. Even a 1/4 resolution it can render. It's fine. I think a half resolution is a little bit too much. Oh, well, I'm still getting about 60 FPS, but if you go full res, it gets to down to like 30 FPS. So this is a really big performance slider right here. So if I go back down to my 1080p monitor, 1080p is fine at like max. You can usually render at max. Not really very many performance impacts. So anyway, we have that, and then we also have bilateral blur, and so you can see that. This is the dithering effect I was talking about, where you sample at different rates around the pixel screen. And when you do that, you get more detail with the sampling, but then you can use some bilateral blurring to sort of combine all those details to create the sort of final image. And then this right here is just the radius of the blur. It's just an average bilateral blur, and so it doesn't require too many options or anything like that. And so I find that 222 is a pretty good setting for quality performance. And you can see that, and then I also have these different step distances. And these affect, like when you're far away from the planet, you're only rendering 10 steps, and when you're close, you're rendering 25. But you render, like this is 100 steps, and yeah, pretty detailed. But it doesn't really take too much away from the full all the settings to really be just rendering at 25. 25 steps. So yeah, you can still see the shadow, get a pretty good shadow effect and all that, but really rendering at 100 samples is not really very unrealistic. You can see it really doesn't affect my FPS very much at all, really, because I'm so low downsampled. Maybe if I were up higher, yeah, no, it still doesn't affect very much. So, small change. But yeah, samples are very important. I guess it does affect it kind of a bit. Look at that 70 FPS right there, and if I increase them all the way, it's about 60 FPS. So, play with this however you like it. And there's step curves. So basically, this is the interpolation between them. How you want these from far to close to happen. So, yeah. And then here are all the shadow settings. There's you have one main shadow that covers the entire planet and has the resolution of 1024, at least for right now. You can adjust this all the way to 2048. But yeah, I just usually keep it at 1024. This is for like when you're really far away and you only have one shadow map. This is a pretty good resolution. And then you have 4 different cascades, and each one of them has a size, like a clip size of their, like how basically this is the shadow distance, because it's all projected onto the atmosphere. And so then I have this one that's kind of far away, that's 512. And then I have this one over here, like just to give it a little bit of detail when I'm sort of looking at a thing from a little bit far away, but not too far. And this one over here is 1,000, size of 1,000, so this is basically a distance of 1,000 away. And, another 512. And then I have this one over here that's kind of close range distances. Like this one, for example, I'm sure is showing these shadows. But if I were to, I can actually adjust this right now. Yeah, you can see that line right there is where these shadows are cutting off. So if I choose to 500 and then 200, so those were the sort of the close range shadows, and it has a resolution of 1024. But then this is the really close range. This size right here is basically the distance away, and so this one, 1024, is like the resolution of this shadow right here. I can adjust the size. If I lower the size, you can see it's really high resolution. And yeah, the larger the size, the lower the density, but about 100 with 2048 is pretty good. And so, yeah, those are pretty much all the new rendering features, the downsampling. Let me downsample this, because honestly, the downsampling actually is a good effect too. It blurs the shadows. It's not just for performance reason, it blurs the shadows. You can see right here, the shadows are far better, like blurred and stuff, and, softer and stuff. So, I mean, there are still a lot of things, like these shadows were just an idea I had. They're not like, I haven't fully, fleshed out the idea, so there's a few things that I can do to improve how they look and how they render and all that. And so I'll be looking into that, but I think this is a good start for anyone who wants to render, huge shadow map for a planet. And so yeah. Now, other than that, just usability settings. I have over here this LUT, the lookup table generator. And I've shifted from a program that I wrote in C++ to generate these to now a pixel shader with the LUT generator. And so I have this material over here that's my generator material, and then I go over here to my custom render target. You can create one of those custom render targets over here, and then you just set up the material, drag it in here, and it generates. You can see it changes with the properties that I use. See? And so you can use this to real-time affect the light. So I can actually do that right now. If I go over here and I grab this and I say I want to increase the HR density, I can do that right now in real time. So yeah, and then I can maze scattering, and things all in real time. So now you can sort of more interactively adjust your settings and not have to wait. And then also you can go over here to this if you like these settings, you don't want to keep rendering this because it's updating every frame. If I like these settings, I can just go export. Go to and just save it over here, right here. Then you're gonna have to set up a few settings for this, so you'd have to go clamp. Biliner will be good. Disable sRGB color space. Alpha is transparent. No, you don't want that. Then you also want to disable this to none. Apply this, and you'll get the right setting. But honestly, though, you should probably set this to yeah. Anyway. So you have these LUTs you can generate, but this I didn't find it was very high quality generations, and so I also wrote it over here. You can go to LUT generator and plug in the values, so 32 resolution, step count of 100, atmosphere ratio of 0.25, you know, all these different things, and I can just click generate and drag it into here and save it as an EXR. Save LUT to that place. And so LUT.exr. Save it to where? Oh yeah, here. I just have to refresh. Yeah, here it is. And so this one is actually a really high quality one. It's a full resolution with like I think it's RGBA float format. Here you go. So yeah, you can see it's linear RGB HDR. No, shouldn't have any compression on it. Yeah, RGBA half. And so this one is like your full resolution one, and you can use this one in here. But yeah, if you don't want to go through all that, you can just use this directly. You can use this directly and just have it update on load or on demand and then force it to update or something like that. But yeah. And so I think that's about it for the render settings. There's a few things that I changed, like this atmospheric renderer. Now it's not an actual object when seen. It's sort of an identity object, or like it's just a renderer like you would treat any other renderer. And over here in the camera, I have a screen space. Well, it's like an image effect that it has basically just settings right here. It is the one that references the settings. And so each camera can have individual settings, and then each atmosphere can override the settings of the camera they're being rendered by. And so if you want to, adjust settings very easily, you can just, like for a specific, because for any given camera effect, any given atmosphere, they can have individual shadows. They have individual shadows, and so if you override the shadow setting, if you override the setting from the atmosphere, it will render with those shadows instead of the ones from the camera. But usually I don't really see very many situations where you'd actually need to override the settings. You'd probably just want to have one group of settings that you set on the camera. And another thing is, the reason I went with this image effect approach, well, it's not really an image effect, it's more of a command buffer. And the reason I went with that is so that I could customize where the effect is rendered and when, and that way I can add post-processing. And so you can see here I've added post-processing, and that creates a pretty nice tone mapping for the sun. So if I go over here to post-processing settings, you can see if I disable color grading, you can see it's all washed out and stuff, and then the tone mapping brings it back into reasonable ranges. I can also create bloom. Bloom works with it. Anti-aliasing works with it. All these vignettes work with it. Grain. Ambient occlusion even works with it. And so, yeah, that was one of the main things that I really wanted, was just color grading, because without it, it's just everything's super washed out. You can kind of see right here. Everything's sort of just like a very bright, it just makes everything a nice color. You can even go in here and change everything to like blue and, well, not that. I'm going to change like the temperature, for example. You can change, give it a very sharp color, make it darker, make it bluer. You can adjust the tint of everything. All these things you can change fairly easily. And so it's like a global effect on the whole thing. So yeah, I just really wanted to add that because it's kind of an important thing. So I can also add post exposure and whatnot. Just I can change everything from here, and it's treated as part of the stack instead of because before it rendered after all of these effects, and so none of these effects actually changed how the image looked, or changed how my atmosphere looked. And yeah, this is rendering in linear color space, by the way, so I would recommend that one over the other ones because it works better with the tone mapping and conversion and all that type of stuff. So you can see here the cameras that are actually rendering it, and these I tried to optimize them as best I could to create. Let me drop. I'll drop down. So you can see that the shadows. This is what's rendering. So yeah, you can see that this is basically how the camera space work, and so basically you can see the closest one down there is your current resolution, and then there's just this giant one all around it, around the whole box that affects the entire scene. And you can actually adjust how far away that one is, or like how far they start forward. And so you can get shadows from other places. So. I'm not sure if some of these settings you can't adjust in real time. I don't know if this is one you can adjust in real time. So yeah, you just move the near clip plane, and so you can move it off. I mean, you can move it back, and that way you could have shadows from like like a spaceship flying in front. I haven't added shadows behind, so if there were a ship behind the planet, it would probably not have shadows on it because it's sort of screenspace effect. So, yeah. Anyway, I think that's about it for all of the changes, and there'll probably be a few changes to come. I'm thinking about doing cloud rendering because I could add that as part of the same effect, and so it sort of minimized performance cost, like the cost of performance. I improved the way that the rendering works. Before I used a giant sphere for these things, and now I've actually wrote a shader to map. Well, I wrote a function to map the sphere to project the sphere onto the screen and map it to a 2D bounding box. And so in reality, this whole atmosphere is just a single quad now that's being rendered only when it's on the screen and only where it's visible. It doesn't render anywhere else. It still is a quad though, so there's corners that might not ever be rendered really, but So yeah. This is a very long video, but I mean there was a lot of things to cover, so I hope you'll stick with me here. But yeah, I think this is about it. This is pretty much what I've been working on with this. I hope you liked it. It should make working with it a lot easier, and it has a lot of new features that really I think could improve the visuals. You want to use them, but you can disable most of them for I showed you can disable shadows very easily. You can disable shadow opacity. All these things are very easy to do. And so yeah. So I'm probably going to make a few updates to some other projects that I've been working on, and I'll be releasing this project pretty soon. I mean this update pretty soon. But I just wanted to show you the newest update. So anyway, see you then.